specifically critical thinking in the education system?
So, I mean, I think we understand what critical thinking is.
All right.
That's not the issue. The problem is, how do you get students, and in particular little kids, to think critically? And it's not as if we don't know the solution already. We do know the solution. It's not. It's simple. It's not complicated. Little kids are curious. You just have to cultivate that curiosity. So it's in some sense it's you actually in many people have remarked that you don't have, if you want to cultivate the curiosity, you just don't have to beat it out of them. The curiosity is already there.
Yeah.
So kids like to question. They like to feel their surroundings. They like to understand what's going on. And you just have to, have them explore.
All right. And what do you think, like if we talk about our own education system, do we see this curiosity, this critical thinking in our students?
Well, like I said, kids are always curious. It is the school system that will beat all the curiosity out of them over the many years that they remain within the formal education system. So, okay, let's talk some specific examples. Like instead of beating about the bush, let's just get right to the point.
All right.
And let me just give you the example of my little kid. Right? So he was going to a school which I'm not going to name because it's not
of course.
It's not polite to name names. It's not important to be naming names anyway. And I'm not going to say that all schools are like that, but I will tell you that it was one of those schools that aren't too light on the pocket.
Okay.
I'm not going to say that it was like ridiculously expensive. I mean, I could afford it, but then again, I make more money than a large chunk of the population anyway. So I mean, just saying that I could afford it doesn't mean that it's very cheap. So he was actually going to a good school, a school with an excellent reputation, a school that churns out A grades upon A grades in O levels and A levels exams. So it was a good school for sure, according to those markers. And for us, the decision to send our kid there was very simple because he was very, very little. Of course, I mean, all kids are very little at one point in their lives, and you don't want them traveling a long distance to go to a school. And so this was a good school which was close to home, and that's why he was going there.
All right.
So at that school, when my kid was in playgroup, in the guise of teaching him general knowledge, they had them memorize all these different facts. And that can be a fun activity. I mean, developing memory is important. I get that. But let's take specific questions that my kid was asked to actually be able to recall. So one of those was, what is the tallest peak of Pakistan? And we know the answer. It's not a complicated answer. It's not a complicated question. But the question to ask is, does a child at that age appreciate what a peak is? And I realized that my son had no idea of what a hill was, even though we were actually surrounded by hills, right? So I mean, where our home was, it was actually surrounded by hills. So I tested this idea. I mean, he was inside the car, and I tried to see if he could tell if we were going uphill or downhill. And at that point in time, he was unable to identify whether the car was going uphill or downhill. And so it's, I mean, just having kids return facts, regurgitate out facts, is not developing their critical thinking.
True.
Plain and simple.
Hmm.
Let me give you another example. Again, my son. So, while teaching him Islamic studies at that age, one of the things that he was asked to recall was, what are the 5 pillars of Islam?
A very common
So
question.
let's analyze this question. Does he know what a pillar is? Absolutely no clue. Right? Does he know what Islam is? No idea. And to top it all, he couldn't even count to 5. So a kid who, if you put pencils in front of him, he'd say 1, 2, 3, so many. So he loses interest after 3, even if he can say the letters 4 and 5, he can't bring himself to count to 6 or 7 or 8. So he can't count pencils on a table.
Yeah, so 1, 2, 3, there are more.
But we want him to be able to regurgitate to us the 5 pillars of Islam. Meaningless. Utterly meaningless.
Yeah. And he must have memorized the answer, the question itself. Like when the pillar and Islam, these 2 words are there, so I have to name these 5.
Exactly. That's how it works. It's like he could remember those. That's fine. That's okay.
Yeah.
Right? But is that education? It isn't. It's certainly not developing critical thinking.
Indeed. So, what do you think? Like, we have talked about this problem side. This is true. This is what is happening. I mean, if we do not talk about the best universities, best schools here, specifically in our country, in general, this is a reality. Because we are
I'm telling you that my son was going to one of the best schools in the country.
Yeah.
He was going to one of the best school systems. Right? So he was going to a very good school. He wasn't just going there because it was close to home. Had it been a school with a lesser reputation or a school with no reputation, I would have not minded sending him to a school that was a little further away. But since this was a school within driving distance, within very close to our home, and it was a good school, that's why I was sending him there. So this was a good school.
Yeah. Okay, I got your point. And that was also the reason I started with that cliche question, that what is critical thinking?
Right.
Because if we do not see the critical thinking, you might know the meaning and you take it like everybody understands it, but if we go out, we don't see the educational institutions, schools are developing that critical thinking skills in the students. Let me ask the same question again. What is critical thinking?
Well, it's very simple. I would just say that critical thinking is the ability to understand complex situations, break them down, and then come up with a solution, synthesize a solution out of whatever is taught to you. So critical thinking would involve the ability to understand the problem, the ability to analyze that problem, and then to come up with a solution to it. Does that work?
Yeah, that works. Now, let's talk about that.
Good.
Why don't we see this in our education system? And if we want that, we were talking about one of the best schools in which they are just not teaching that critical thinking, they are just not giving him the solutions of the problem, even how to identify a problem.
No, we're confused as a society. I see. Identifying the problem, I think, is the first step, and that, I think, is, and I'm sure you understand that there is a problem, and that's precisely why you're going around trying to look for a solution to it. Yes, but finding a solution is not that easy.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that complicates it for us is our large population. Right? So, I can give you a solution that works, but how do you scale it to the level of the country? Now, that's a completely different question. If you're just going to ask me, how should education be structured? I think better educationists than me have worked on this particular problem. We just have to see what's out there, right? And I don't think it's very complicated to pick out the core ingredients that bring about a good educational system. That's not so hard, right? So I mean, and of course, even in amongst the core ingredients, there will be some differences of opinion around the world, and that's okay. Those can be debated, those can be looked at, and we can look at different objective measures of taking, of deciding what to pick and what to choose. But really, so really these are two problems. One of those is a problem of scale. How do you scale it to the whole country? And the other one is what exactly needs to be done. So I think the first thing is to try to understand what actually needs to be done. So one thing that needs to be done is kids in playgroup don't need to have separate subjects of general knowledge and Islamic studies. It's just meaningless, right?
Good.
Actually, I would say that even all the way into their primary education, kids don't need differentiation into different subjects. It's just meaningless, right? So what you can do is you could just teach the kids how to read and write and to do a little math, and that's it. And while you're doing this, you can give them life skills. That's what's important. You can have them look at problems that are appropriate for their level, and have them come up with solutions to those problems. That would just be inculcating critical thinking, right? I think this whole idea of kids studying 6 or 7 or 8 subjects in primary school is just it does more disservice than it does any good to the children.
True. Yeah. Okay. I mean, if we talk about the other perspective, we have been interviewing different schools as well, and when we ask them that, why don't you develop this thing in your students? So they say, parents usually do not support us in doing these things. They just want us to do the fabricated thing, and we do it. This is the requirement of the market. This is the requirement of the parents. This is what they are expecting from us, and we are doing this.
No, I don't agree with that. I'm sure if somebody were to begin with a good, decent school, I'm sure that school is going to succeed. If somebody just needs to be able to have the wisdom and the courage to try that experiment. I don't think the idea of good education can't be sold. I just completely do not believe that.
All right. So I mean, if we talk about the other education systems,
I mean, okay. So if but let me give you a counter example.
Please.
So I mean, like, schools should be doing what they think is best for the kids, right? Good. Why should the schools be running after what the parents are asking for, right? Certainly the private schools that you might have gone to, certainly they're not doing what government schools are doing. Why aren't they doing that? Right? Because they see that, okay, I mean, that's not the right way to go. We have to create a difference, and they're doing that. And so somebody began this whole thing about private school education in Pakistan. They're looking, of course, at market forces as well. Will people be willing to pay for it? And also also by seeing that, okay, is there an educational need for them to be doing that? And that certainly is there.
Yeah.
So let me give you another example. Coming to the same point, there are some parents who I've seen when I was a kid going to school. There were some parents who would go to the teachers and tell them, इसको आप जितना मर्जी लगाएं लेकिन इसको पढ़ाएं ज़रूर. So just by going by parents' demands, should the teachers start beating the kids? The parents can't get whatever they want all the time.
Yeah, true.
And that's only one aspect. But I think that there is a good school set on sound footings will find good students. I'm sure about that.
As you know, that schools are also connected with the bodies. There are different bodies available who are going to conduct the exams and all. So when we talk about, I mean, literally, I was once talking to one school authority, and I was telling them that you should work on their skills. You should work on their public speaking skills, their communication skills, their critical thinking skills. And they were saying, yeah, but what exactly? Why do we need to do that? Because in the exam, they have a different pattern. Because let's suppose if we talk about the Lahore board, if we talk about the Cambridge exam system, so they are preparing them for that exam only.
Yeah.
So they don't want to work on the skills.
Yes, and that is very short-sighted of them.
Yeah.
And this is, I don't know, maybe we talked about this last time you were here, because we were focused on higher education.
Yes.
If I remember. And maybe the issue came up that, and I might have remarked that the Pakistanis have broken A levels.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So what they've basically done is they've realized, hey, you know what? The British are slaves of tradition. They're conservative in general. They are conservative in general, which is true. And so if we just look at the previous 15 years exams, and if we have our kids do them all, then 100% of the exam paper is going to be out of the last 15 years questions papers. And that is probably true. This is... But does that mean that we're educating our kids? Again, it doesn't.
True.
Right? So I would submit to you that the whole system is broken. I would submit to you that the entire system is broken. I've seen little kids, like at the primary level, getting home tuitions.
A very common norm in
That's
our society.
ridiculous. I mean, why is that common?
Yeah.
Why do kids even going for high school education need extra tuition? Why is it normal? Yeah, I can understand if somebody is really struggling, for them to be seeking out tutors and stuff like that. But I can't understand an entire class struggling. Is just meaningless.
True.
So yeah, the problems are there are multiple problems. But let's get back to the thing that there's one more thing that I wanted to point out, and that is the choice of language that needs to be used at the primary level.
Good.
That's very important.
True.
You can't expect kids to absorb in a language that they don't understand themselves.
True.
Right? The way our elite schools are solving this problem is by eliminating Urdu to a very large extent. Right? So when my kids started to going to school, and I noticed this more with my daughter, she was going to the same school as my son. When I'd ask her, what you do during the day, and I did talk to her in Urdu, and she was like, हमने तो कुछ भी नहीं बोला, हम तो चुप बैठे रहे. क्यों चुप बैठे रहे? क्योंकि टीचर ने कहा था कि इंग्लिश में बोलना है या नहीं बोलना, तो हम तो आप सारे जो हैं हम तो सारे चुप बैठे रहे. And so the teacher kept that up for, I think, several weeks. Eventually the kids started speaking in broken sentences, and they, started to build their confidence, and and then they learned English and all that. And okay, this works for them to the extent that now the kids are conversant in one language, namely English. And fair enough, now they can read, they can eventually they can read, they can write and think in English. Alright, good. But for the majority of our kids, they just get stuck in this Urdu/English paradigm. They don't know one language, and they're expected to do math in English, they're expected to do some things in English, they're expected to do some things in Urdu. And they end up not knowing any of the two languages properly.
True.
Right? So the world over, primary education is in the language of convenience for the child. The purpose of primary education is to develop the creativity of the kids, to develop the imagination of the kids. In the words of Einstein, if you want your kids to be smart, tell them fairy tales. If you want them to be smarter, tell them more fairy tales. Right? So, I mean, if Einstein is saying that, I think we got to take it a bit seriously, right? So I think that guy understands creativity better than all of us put together. So I mean, that's important, right? The most important thing that you could teach little kids is confidence, imagination, public speaking. And you could do a lot of that by them making their own fairy tales. Just giving them the beginnings of a story and let them run wild with the idea.
Good.
Right? That's an excellent way of teaching kids. Right? But that would be done. That's best done in a language in which the kids can actually think.
Yeah. Good.
Right?
Yeah. So in the thinking capability, language is the first barrier. That's true. And secondly, if we talk about, just as you were talking about, that we just simply have to give them the imagination, that they are coming up with the ideas. So even if they are coming with the silly ideas, let's suppose, and you take it like it's a very common thing, might be it's silly for you, but it's creative for him. So let him do that. Secondly, I came to know about that. I did not research it. Might be it's true or might not be, but I heard about that. Like in Japan, they have introduced an education system in which till the class 5 there would be no book. They will be working on the imagination. They will be working on the vision, their exposure. So they will be working on these things. Do you think working on these things gonna help us? Because they are targeting, because in the 5th class there is a proper, again, one exam from the board, so they are preparing them for that.
Do we still have board exams at grade 5? I don't think so.
Yes, they do. It's optional. If students want to go for that, they can. If they don't want to go,
so just opt out of it. I said, just opt out of it. I mean, if something is so detrimental, just opt out of it.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So how do you see this Japan education system?
But I'm not. So look, I did not. I'm pretty sure they teach them math as well. Till grade 5, I would be very surprised if they don't teach them math.
No, they would definitely be teaching them.
Right. So then it's fine. Yeah. If they're teaching them math and they're teaching them how to think, how to just look. I mean, I think I'm a big fan of the Japanese model myself. Anyway, I did not know about this specific thing, but I would have guessed that they don't have formal examinations. That part is, I would have guessed on my own. But one good thing that Japan does is impart life skills to kids. So
I've also heard about
a very important thing about their culture is discipline. It's also reverence to the elders, and it's politeness, and they try to inculcate all of that within their primary education model. They try to inculcate discipline by having the kids clean up their classrooms.
Good.
And that's amazing. I mean, I think that a lot of our kids would benefit a lot.
Yeah, true. I mean, those life skills that they are teaching, our students are not even aware that they have to do this. They take it like there are other people who will do this work. These are the life-related things. Everybody should learn about that. Okay, if we just simply put it in a nutshell, what's your suggestion? I mean, we are not talking about universities. We are not talking about the colleges.
No,
we are talking about
we're talking about schools.
Yeah, because that's where is the foundation, is the basic, where we need to work. And if everything is perfect already, because if we go out and talk to people that this is what we need to do, so they usually say, things are going fine. So they have their own insecurity, because if they adopt a new system, so it means we will change them. We don't want to change them. We want them to bring the change. So what do you suggest? I mean, in your opinion, what are the things that we should do in the schools so that children, they are getting educated? They're not only just passing the years.
The first thing is not overburdening the kids. That is very important. I think if you were to go and talk to any school around And if you were to, and I've done it with a couple schools already, and if you were to ask around, you'll probably, if you go to a school and you tell them, if you ask them, hey, why are you a good school? And they'll say, look, we have our kids do so much more than other schools. We have them work this hard, this much hard, this and that. And so once I pointedly asked somebody, okay, it's great that you are giving them extra work, but what if a kid is not performing to the level that you want them to perform? Then what do? And there was no response to that.
They fail them.
They basically just cannot factor into their education system that kids would be learning at different rates. Some kids are a bit better at picking up language. Some kids are better at picking up drawing. Some kids are better at doing math. Right? Good education systems allow for that kind of flexibility. I myself had the privilege of beginning my early years education in England. I did begin going to school in Pakistan, and I think I went here for a few months or so. I don't remember exactly. Perhaps it was a year. I don't know exactly. But I think when I was 5.5 or so, that's when we went to England for a couple of years.
All right.
And I spent 2 years in an English school, an English government school. I don't want to call it a public school. From our perspective, it was a public school, but in the English school system, a public school is something different. A public school is a private school. So that's a little confusing. But anyway, so it was a government-run school, and I spent 2 years there. And one memory that I have is they had us do creative writing. But their idea of creative writing was, in 1 year, we wrote, I think, 2 or 3 short, very short essays / stories. That was it. They didn't overburden us with anything. Schools here doing creative writing here expect the kids to churn out creative material at least twice a week.
Yeah, and which they have
in
memorized
both languages. That's silly, right? It just takes the fun out of it. Right? Okay, it's still better than not having them write anything creatively. I get that aspect, but our kids are just being overburdened. Another thing that they did over there. So I was a little better doing math. Yeah, big surprise, doing theoretical physics right now. So what they did, what my teacher did with me was they didn't push me to do something that I didn't want to do. Yes, they made sure that I was learning English at a reasonable rate, at a reasonable pace, but at my own pace. All the kids had, so the way you would learn to read English was you had a corner library inside the classroom where the books were color coded. So the English have really thought it through. They don't say level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They say red, green, blue, yellow, orange, and I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know.
To ask you.
I didn't know whether red was higher or yellow was higher. So you only got to know. So the teacher would just tell you, oh yeah, you know what? Okay, you're done with this. So why don't you pick up one of the red books? So you just go to the library and you'd see which red book would tickles your fancy, and you'd pick it up and you just begin reading it. That's how they did it. And this is like when I was a kid. So this is back in 1986, 87 that I'm talking about. But since I was doing well at math, they just let me do the workbooks of math. And so what I did was I just kept doing them. I was finding them interesting. I just finished them all, and I finished all the workbooks relevant to that particular grade, and they just picked up the next level. They handed those to me. It wasn't कि अच्छा ठीक है भाई अब आपने ये कर लिया है अब आप वो बाकी काम करें. No, it's like okay, you're enjoying this. These are the books and these are the workbooks that we normally hand to kids at the next level. आप अभी से करना शुरू कर. That's it.
That's great.
So the thing is, you have to allow for this difference in kids' abilities. You have to just allow. You just have to ensure that by the end of their primary years, they should have decent math skills, and they should have decent language ability, and that's it. That's the goal of education. And while you're doing this, I'm sure you would be developing critical thinking.
Yeah, the example that you're sharing, that is from the 1986. It's 2021 and we don't have that system till now. You're sharing your story. Let me tell you mine. When it's back in 2005 and I see the same. I saw the same thing back in 2015. Even in the metric level, there are 18 or 20 essays that students are supposed to memorize. Those essays were for the creative writing, the students memorize. And then there comes the hero teacher, the instructor, and he says, I am telling you these 4 essays, and you're going to get one of these 4 essays in your exam. So what students do, they memorize the essay. And memorization means the whole class have the same my friend essay. They all have the same cow definition and the essay on that. Everything is same. So we're just not working on that. And I really appreciated the way you were saying that if you were good in mathematics, let's suppose, so they were okay that even if you were average in English, that's acceptable. You can do the mathematics. The same story I heard about Einstein. Einstein was also good in mathematics, and he failed other subjects, and he had to appear again so that he should get the average marks into that thing. So that's so true. We need to understand it, what is the area of interest of this specific student, and we need to work on that. We cannot generalize the system and we apply it on all the students. It's not going to work for that. And secondly, if you have this large education system, I heard one statement from one of my instructor. He said, if you have this biggest system and only 1% or 2% people are successful, so you can't say the whole system is successful. Because 98% is not successful. 98% people are really struggling, and they question this thing that why did we go to school? Why did we get the education?
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, I was once invited to give a talk on the ills of the Pakistani education system and to focus on the higher education end of things. And I began with this particular thing in mind. So I began with some success stories. So I looked through the news and I came up with, okay, look, there's this guy who secured, 20 something A's at A levels, and that this is something to be proud of. This is something to be cheering. But then there's a thing which is known as a standard normal distribution. Right? A standard normal distribution basically just means that when there's a theorem in statistics which says that whenever you're dealing with large numbers can always be put into what is known as a standard normal distribution form. Not stand, but normally distributed. Stand normal would be something more specific, but there's a link between the two. So you could put everything on a normal curve, a bell curve. And what the bell curve basically tells you is that something like 67% of the population is going to be within what is known as one standard deviation of the average. And if you go to 3 standard deviations, that gives you 99% or so, a little more than 99%. 2 standard deviations is 95% of the average. Right? You go to 5 standard deviations, it's 99.9999 or something like that, a crazy number like that. These examples are beyond 5 sigma. There's always going to be an example like that, but that doesn't mean that your system is good. It's just these guys are going to be, there's always going to be exceptions. There's always going to be an Abdus Salam coming out of your village school from Jhang, but that does not make
the whole
his
system
education, does not vindicate the education that he got in Jhang or at government college in Lahore. That doesn't make these institutions great. It's just that Abdus Salam was an amazing individual. Right? So yes, you're absolutely right. We have to work on getting our average high, getting our average better. And we're nowhere near doing that right now.
Well, Rizwan, thank you so very much for your time once again, and coming here, asking you these questions and getting unleash the fact and uncover the ground reality is actually the purpose of coming here, and you do it in a very wonderful way. We really appreciate that thing. Well, thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
For giving
Good
us your
having you
time.
here.